Hello all. I've not done a video in a while, obviously. I generally do them when I feel a responsibility to. If I think that others are missing something that needs to be out there, either for now or for the future generations, that's when I feel obligated to do a video. First, we'll recap for future audience members. It's 2020. And the recent death of a man named George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police sparked violent riots in hundreds of cities across the nation. Of course, in our internet age, literally hundreds of people are providing their opinions about what led to this condition more broadly and what can be done to move forward peacefully. A lot of these are dead wrong, and many are on the right track, but there's a piece of the puzzle that's missing. And I've not heard anyone mention this piece of the puzzle. The main question is, where does the hatred between the so-called black community and law enforcement come from? The obvious answer that you'll hear from the left is that police are hunting down black men and killing them in the streets. That's what we are seeing on the news, after all. But many people have presented FBI statistics on this. And both the overall numbers of unarmed black men being killed by police and the comparative numbers between white and black suspects being killed by police, along with the penalties suffered by officers who are truly out of line, show that there is no systemic anti-black racism or injustice on the part of the police, and that police are, in fact, 25% more likely to kill a white man in similar situations. So, even with the biased and irresponsible coverage of these events, there's just not enough hate there to create this violent anti-police uprising. It's like an astrophysicist looking out at the movement of stars in a galaxy and calculating that there's not enough gravity to hold the galaxy together. There must be something more. Now, obviously, many have pointed out that the organization that calls itself Black Lives Matter is not an organization that is focused on improving the lives of black people. It's an organization that is taking advantage of an opportunity that exists to push a totally different agenda behind the shield of perceived racial injustice. By their own recorded admission, they are trained Marxists. Clearly, Black lives matter to BLM, ironically in the same way that they mattered to the slave merchants and to the plantation owners. They matter insofar as they can be of use. Now, obviously, whether a person is a capitalist or a Marxist is not a racial question. It's a question of moral judgment. If you are a capitalist, regardless of your race, your life does not matter to Black Lives Matter. If you are a Marxist, regardless of race, you may be of use to Black Lives Matter. So the question becomes, where does the opportunity that BLM exploits originate? What are the real mistakes that are systemic, that we have made as a nation, that would provide this cache of weapons to the enemies of capitalism and freedom? The two words I've not heard anyone say with respect to these riots say it all. Drug prohibition. In short, there are several ingredients in this recipe for disaster, but none is as fundamental or as important as the drug prohibition question. What we're experiencing in the United States is an effect of placing our police on the wrong side of natural law for decades. Our police departments across the nation have been destroying the lives of innocent people and shaking down their families for money for as long as most of us can remember. And only in recent years have states begun to relax this condition. Make no mistake, police in this era are not murdering young black men for sport. Literally, the vast majority of unarmed black or white men who die at the hands of police officers would still be alive if they had simply complied with the reasonable requests of polite and respectful officers. There are exceptions, but they are statistically zero. But when you arrest someone for nonviolent possession or distribution of drugs, or saddle them or their parents with thousands of dollars of fines and legal bills, not to mention a record that follows them around for the rest of their lives, for a lot of people that may as well be a death sentence. And this injustice harms tens of thousands of victims in the so-called black community. Of course, it's harmed the so-called white community just as much, but this is not perceived in the so-called black community. I know what it's like to stand out on a freeway in shorts and a t-shirt on a windy 40-degree evening while cops go through my car for an hour, all because I was doing 5 miles over the speed limit in one case. And then in another incident, I was told my tire had touched the white line on the right of the right lane. I happened to be driving a brand new Cadillac that my girlfriend had rented for me with her double upgrade coupon talents. And the car was almost as wide as the lane itself, from my perspective, as a guy who at that time had been driving a Honda Accord around. So in other words, I didn't look like a guy at that time who would be driving that car. So apparently I fit a profile. In another situation, I was working in system engineering at a company, and most of the people around me were of no help whatsoever. Then they hired another guy, whom the left would call white, and it didn't take me long to realize that this guy was very good. He's a good addition to the team, knowledgeable, he could solve problems, he could communicate in writing like an adult, whereas many of the other people I've run into in my career can barely manage a grunt in an email. It was a great relief to me, and he and I hit it off immediately and we started to become friends. One day I came into work and was told by management we had to let him go because it turns out he had a possession charge that he didn't disclose. The point is, these kinds of laws create second-class citizens. It's a scarlet letter, or a Star of David around the arm if you prefer. And this has devastated communities, mainly of poor, underprivileged people of all races, but particularly young so-called black men. And there's another side of this coin, which is that young men who otherwise would be forced to enter the workforce find an opportunity in underground markets created by prohibition to make a living as such without otherwise working. If they'd not been provided that opportunity, they would have chosen other paths. They would have had no choice. There's enough hatred in that pool of poison to sink 1,000 nations, and it is earned. Now, I know a lot of conservatives would listen to this and say, you're caving to the left on the issue of drug prohibition, or a phrase I hear from time to time, defining deviancy down. First of all, say this with me. Leftists do not have positions on issues. Leftists do not have positions on issues. Leftists pretend to take positions on issues in order to advantage themselves so they can gain votes and power. They take positions on issues in the same way that serial killer Ted Bundy placed his arm in a fake cast. Ending drug prohibition is a popular issue for young voters. It also happens to be a conservative position constitutionally. Clearly, the right are divided on the issue, with more and more being open-minded on it as time goes by. But the stereotype projected by the left and accepted by too many Republicans is that Republicans must be hardline drug prohibitionists. We should never have yielded that issue to the left. If there is anyone who deserves reparations, it's nonviolent drug offenders who have had the American dream taken from them by the state through their police departments. The destruction we see all around us is a self-inflicted wound, and it's provided a cache of weapons to the enemies of freedom. Of course, there are several other factors in the equation which have been addressed by many other individuals, including the welfare state, the failed leftist education cabal, etc. But without that colossal injustice of drug prohibition in the United States, this perfect storm would not have had the Category 5 source of power. How do we address this? Well, consider known drug users like Barack Obama. He partied it up on pot and cocaine, as far as we know, but never stopped. More power to him. But what did he do when he got into office about relaxing federal drug laws? Not much. What's good for him is not good for others, as it turns out. But look at Donald Trump. By all accounts, he's never even taken a sip of alcohol, let alone any other drug. And even with the entire media and Congress on his back, along with creating the greatest economy the world has ever known for everyone, including so-called minorities, he still found time to push for meaningful reform and pardoned drug offenders. We need law and order for people who are harming, defrauding, or using coercion against their fellow citizens. But we don't need anyone to police our moral choices in life. These are mistakes for us to make as we choose. And that's what freedom is all about, like it or not. Thank you.